Good to go.
So Heather, you want to do some kind of introduction thing or whatever, or you want to just go ahead and just start rolling?
Go ahead and start rolling. Thank you, Brock. I will say thank you. I appreciate you giving up your time to teach this course virtually, as we are going to learn how to do a lot of these things virtually now. So thank you again, and I'll let you go ahead and get started.
Okay, great. So first I want to say thank you to Heather and Amy for putting this in front of me. I kind of put myself out there and said I'd be willing to help in any way that I could. And I think that this is a really awesome way to be able to contribute in a time where, you know, I guess training or, you know, education could be something that people would have a little more time to do. So before we go into this, I want to let everybody know that I'm going to be sharing my screen and going over some a very simple form. But the first thing I want to do is kind of introduce this class and give a little bit of a background of why I think it's so important. In commercial leasing, okay, there is kind of a gap for most people where they don't have the understanding of how to like deliver an offer if they have a client. So a lot of times whenever you're dealing with your residential clients, some of them, and you know what, I'm going to just put this out there before we get started real quick. There's going to be some times where during this class, I'm going to have some kind of terminology or language or something that you guys don't understand. If it's a word that you don't know what it is, or you're kind of curious about what it is, just type it in the chat, and then either Heather or Amy will stop and I'll go over what that is really quickly. I want to try to be as like succinct and brief as possible, because I know you guys got a lot of stuff to do. But again, the importance of this class is that a lot of your residential clients are going to end up one day maybe like thinking about starting a business, or thinking about going into business with someone else, or they already have a business and they want to go ahead and rent something. They want to rent something in the area to be able to run their business. So say they're moving from California and they're in the military and their wife has a boutique. She closed it down out there, or husband, either one, their spouse has a boutique and they want to open it up here and they want to rent retail space. And most of the time they're going to be renting an office, a retail space, or some type of industrial space, right? So I'm just going to can this whole project down into one category. So we're going to pretend today that you are an agent working with a tenant that you've sold a house to, all right? So that's kind of like where I want you to put your minds when we get started. So you've sold a house or a lot or a piece of real estate to someone who's moved here and they've got a business, and now you're going to go help them. They're like, hey, you know, Bree, Avery, Henry, Alexis, Amy, Devin, Matt, whoever you are, we want you to help us. We like you so much. We want you to help us with our commercial stuff. We're going to rent a property here in town. This is what this class is for. It's so that you can take them out, go and look at places, and then when it comes to the time where you're going to make an offer to the landlord or to the other agent who has this property marketed, this is the instrument that you're going to use. Remember a second ago when I said that there's a gap, is that there's really no official form for a letter of intent, okay? So this is the instrument that you're going to use to communicate your like first run of negotiations with whoever's marketing the property or whoever the landlord is, right? There are all kinds of flavors of this particular document. I mean, there's just no one that you're going to look at and say, oh, well, that one's better than the one. And listen, you might Google it and find one better than the one that I'm showing you. But the reason I'm showing you the one that I've got here today when I start sharing the screen is because it's the simplest one, right? So I'm going to try to keep this as simple and as streamlined as possible. And as we go through this, as there are times for like definitions, I'm gonna take a quick little break and ask you guys some questions, and I may call on you. So you don't have to put your video up. You can if you want to. I'd like to see you guys. But if not, you just try to chime back. And if you're not sure, you know, I'm not picking on you. If I ask who knows the answer to this, nobody's going to say anything. All right. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And we're going to get started. And what we're going to do is going to go top to bottom, line by line. Again, one more time, I want to reiterate what we're doing right now is we're pretending, we're in pretend land, right? We're pretending that you have a client that you've sold a house to, and now they've told you, you know what, Henry, we like you so much that we're going to have you help us rent this property out in town on Western Boulevard, Gum Branch, wherever. And yeah, there you go. I know you're going to do it. That's why you're in here. So we're going to have you rent this property with us, and you're going to be our tenant representative, right? So you've got buyer representation, you've got seller representation, you got the dual agent. In this particular instance, you're going to have them fill out a working with real estate agents lease transaction form, and it's in your North Carolina, you know what I'm talking about, the North Carolina folder, we'll call it, whether it's in Dotloop or wherever it's at. You're going to fill out that, and you're going to also bring this sheet with you so that you can work through it, okay? Here we go. All right. Can everybody see this Word document? All right, so at the very top, the first thing I want you to know is this could be a Word document or whatever type document. You can put your logo here, or if it has like, if we're able to get this made, Heather, we could just put the Jacksonville Board of Realtors or whatever, we could put commercial up here. And then you want to start with the date, the landlord's name, and then this is what we're referencing right here, okay? This is what we're referencing. We're referencing the letter of intent lease proposal. And the biggest thing I want you to know about the top part of this paper is these words right here. Everybody see what I'm highlighting right here? Can you see it? Is you want to make sure that in the very, very beginning, right when you start talking about what's going on in this negotiation, is you want to make sure that you identify that this is a non-binding letter of intent. And these terms that you're putting together are going to be the terms that you use to gin up or draft up an actual binding document that is a commercial lease. So really important, what you need to understand here is that we're going to assume that you've already selected a property, right? We're not going to go through property selection right now. That's not what this class is about. We're going to assume that you've already selected a property. They say, Alexis, they say, this is the one. We want this one, okay? Right? Imagine that. So when you know that they want it, you've got to start generating up some type of written communication or correspondence to whoever's marketing the property, or maybe off market, that we want this one, right? So before we get started on this, I want to ask you guys a question, okay? And since I'm picking on people here, I'm going to pick on Henry. Henry, now picture yourself. The way to be able to do this very easily is picture yourself being a tenant in the business that they're in. Let's just say it's a boutique, right? And it's something retail. And what are some of the things you're going to want to know, like right off the bat, right? Like, what's some of the things you're going to be asking me as your tenant rep? Hey, Brock, these are the things I want to know.
One is the upfit.
Okay. So upfit, that's like, are we going to have to spend some money to renovate this place? That's what upfit is. Go ahead.
Right. The other one's going to be the minimum term length.
So okay, these are both really good. How long? A term? How long? How long are we going to be renting this place, right? How long can we afford to rent this place? And a lot of that depends on how successful they are currently in business, right? Keep going, Henry.
What comes with it? Like, let's say it's already got furniture and stuff like that in it. Does that stay? Does that go? Do I have to pay for it? Any of that stuff?
Those are all really good examples. Hey, I appreciate that. So one of the things I want to also include as like a basis of knowledge that I want you to draw from is always remember, when you're talking with people who are dealing with commercial property, never ever forget your consumer knowledge, right? So he just learned himself all that based off of his knowledge of as a consumer and as somebody who could potentially rent property. And typically those three things are very, very important to people, that what he was talking about. But really the top two are always, how long are we going to be renting this place? And, you know, what are they going to want me to spend money on to renovate it? So both of those are related to how much money is coming out of my pocket. Those things are really, really high on the list of importance for folks that are renting commercial property. And the reason it's important is because they don't own it, right? So they don't own it, so they don't want to be giving too much money to the landlord. And a lot of those improvements are structural, okay? So let's just go right down the list. Remember, I want to reiterate really quickly. Non-binding letter of intent. So if you have this signed up and it's all done and both parties sign, this is not a contract, okay? You can't take them to court. You can't do any of that. I want to reiterate that real quick. This is just so that you can use this to create a legal document. All right. Here we go. So this is gonna function like an offer to purchase or OTP, but it's not. That's the last time I'm gonna say it, I promise. So let's just go down the list. We're gonna identify who the landlord is. So this is an individual's name or a corporate name, right? And then we're gonna identify who the tenant is. Really super important here when you're working with the tenant. If they say, hey, Amy, you know, our business name is, you know, 123 Jacksonville LLC. That's our business name. We're going to have a DBA of, you know, the Go-Getters, right? That's going to be our sign name. So it's highly possible that they've just made this up and they don't have this, and they probably don't even know in a lot of cases that they need to have a charter that designates them as a separate entity with the North Carolina Secretary of State, okay? So you have to look this up. And this is something good that you guys could put in the chat. Amy, if you will, like put the Secretary of State website in the chat to where they can look up the corporation search. So you want to look that up. And when you present this offer, it's a good idea to attach that, whether it be digitally or written, like you just print it and you hand it off in person. It's a really good idea to attach that onto this document so that you can prove that they have signing authority and that they are a registered legal entity in the state of North Carolina or in whatever state that they're in. So it's a very important step. It's just going to show the landlord that you got your stuff together and that you know what you're doing as a tenant agent, right? So the use. This is important because you want to communicate that the use lines up with the zoned or intended use of the property. If the property's in an industrial area, and you got a retail tenant who's going to be selling, you know, we'll call it boutique items to the public, it's not set up for that, okay? So this is not appropriate, and they'll know it right off the bat. Obviously, you want to identify the property address, and the reason that we're doing it again the second time is if there's like a suite number or unit number, this is where you want to add it, okay? The next section is you want to identify gross leasable area of the premises. Okay, and I'm gonna call on somebody real quick and ask a question. Let's call on Corinthia. Hey, Corinthia, why do you think that you should put the word approximately right here, where it says gross leasable area of premises? Let's just say the tenant agent or the landlord's agent or the landlord told you or marketed this property as 2,600 square feet. Why do you want to make sure you always put approximately right
I would say unless you had an appraiser or a professional, someone professional come out and measure it. I don't know.
If you didn't have someone measure it, you want to make sure that you put approximately. Okay, that's good. That's very true. Who else can give me a shot at what they think on this one? Why would you always want to put Alexis, go ahead.
Okay, this is a complete shot in the dark, but I'm thinking that if any changes are made to the property, you don't want the rent fluctuating based off of what the gross leasable area ends up being after those changes are made.
Most important, and that's absolutely right. Great job. If I had like a little prize thing, I'd give it to you. So most important about putting approximately is until you can get someone professional, most of the time, commercial property is leased on a cost per square foot per year basis. So they charge a dollar amount per square foot. And if that is grossly inaccurate, it could swing the amount that you're going to pay monthly a great deal, right? So if it's all 400, 200, 300 square feet, it's a lot of money. So you want to make sure that you you know, you can even indicate in this section right here to be measured at a later date or certain date, right? Because you want to make sure you got that exactly right. It's not like a house where you can just take what's off the thing. Like, you got to have it measured. And in a lot of commercial spaces where they like demise the walls and move things around and upfit and all that stuff, it's highly likely that nobody's measured it since the last tenant that's been in there. Very, very likely. So this is not an error that you want to make. Okay, this is not one of those boxes that you can't check. Before you sign a lease, you, the tenant, everybody needs to get the tape measure or the little, like, you know, digital one where you can stick it on the wall or whatever. You need to measure every room, and you need to make sure it's exactly what they advertised it as, because it's definitely going to have an effect. Unlike residential property, right, where they just say it's $1,200 a month. You know what I mean? So you just go in there and you're renting resident. If it's about $1,200, it doesn't really affect the price at all. So if it's $1,204 or if it's $1,100, it doesn't really matter. Nobody's going to get beat up over it. But you can get beat up over this one pretty bad, right? Because there's a lot of money involved, and they're going to be renting the property over a longer period. Okay. All right. Building managements. You want to make sure you identify the management company if there is one, and put their address and phone number. Not a terrible idea to put the website either. You know, as much information about the management company as you can to make sure that they know who they're going to be communicating their issues to. Next is term. So here's another big difference. How many times have you rented a residential property for 5 years? Not a lot of people have done that, right? So let me ask you a question. And this is I'm going to put this out here. I'm going to pick on somebody. Let's pick on Matt. Matt. Okay, Matt, I got a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, here we go. If somebody told you, hey, Matt, I want to rent this property for my business, and I just want to rent it for 1 year, what's that tell you about this person? Oh, and second part of the question is, would you agree to that?
No. Well,
Okay.
Probably at a higher rate, but the fact of the matter is they're either new and they're not really sure how long they're going to have that business, or it's a temporary place for them, that they have something possibly more long-term lined up after your property.
Right. So it's a giant red flag. Everything that you said is exactly right. And I'm glad that you said it, because a lot of times when you're renting a house or a single family residence for somebody to live in, they most of the time rent it for a year, and then it renews and whatever if they want to stay and all that. And you're not going to get paid off of that stuff, right? But most importantly is this is an indicator of how much more time. Matt, you hit it right on the head. Great job. Thanks for giving us that input. But what I really want you to focus on when you ask them this question, if you've got this paper with you and you just go right down the line when you're meeting with this person in the space, and they say, oh, I just want to rent it for 1 year, you need to really start thinking about how much more time you're going to spend with this person, okay? Because this is an indicator. If somebody can't commit to 3 years for a business in one location, I mean, that's a red flag. I would really put the paper down and say, okay, listen, let's talk about your business. How long have you been doing this? Are you sure? Because this is not something that we want to just try out. The average business is going to spend between $50,000 and $100,000 just getting the doors open. Okay, so we don't want to go too far down the road before we start examining why and how much more time we're going to spend on this. You won't be rude. You just need to go ahead and get it out of the way. All right. Big red flag you guys want to pay attention to. Now, this next section, there's a lot of like variables and math here, and I'm not going to dive deep into that. So I'm going to give you guys just a quick rundown of this next section, okay? But the most important part of this next section is we're going to talk about 3 dates, okay? We're going to talk about the lease execution date, the rent commencement date, and the delivery date. So just remember that. But before we go into that, let's talk about the base and minimum rent and additional rent. So typically, the landlord's going to be asking for a certain dollar amount per square foot per year. That's the way they classify it, right? So here is a little bit, and I don't have Hang on one second. Let's go back to my screen here real quick. I want to go over this pretty quickly here. Hold on. Stop the share. All right, can everybody see my board here? This is going to be crazy, okay? But Amy, can you see this? Okay, so look, check this out. At $16 per square foot, we said that it is, let me erase this real quick. We said that it's 2,600 square feet, right? Can everybody see that? So at 2,600 times $16, let me get the little calculator out right here, right? So 2,600 times 16. That is $41,600. What? Let me bust on somebody here. Hey, Bree, can you hear me?
I knew it.
All right. You did know it, right?
No,
What is this number right here? How much are they paying per what?
per year?
For the year?
Yeah.
They're paying $41,600. So when you see this number advertised this way, this is how you want to calculate it. 2,600 times $16 equals 41,000. So what do we want to do to get that into a monthly term?
Divided by 12.
We want to divide it by 12, right? Divided by 12. 41,600 divided by 12 equals, and you can round this number. So we're going to go with 3466. It's 3465. Okay. $3,465. Can everybody see that right there? Now, this is the way you want to calculate this thing right here. It's pretty simple. But a lot of times what happens is they'll take the 2,600 and multiply it times 16, and they see 41,000, and it scares them to death because they don't get it, okay? A lot of folks don't get this. Let's go back to the share screen. All right, we're almost to the home stretch here, okay? So you also want to understand that there's a possibility that you could pay additional rent. Most of the time, you will have a landlord marketing a property with a base minimum rent that's fixed. And then the additional rent, the reason that it's separated is because it covers the charges for taxes, insurance, and common area maintenance. See, on commercial property, the landlord is legally allowed to forward the charges for the expenses to the tenant, right? So what they do is they separate the taxes per square foot, the insurance, and the common area maintenance, like cutting the grass and stuff like that. They bundle these charges into one number, and they divide it by the total square footage of the building, and then they prorate it per space. Now, that's super complicated, and there's a whole like month's worth of information I could like go into of how this is legally done, but typically the attorney comes up with this formula. It's called a pro rata share, and they come up with this price. So this price, $2.50 per square foot per year, you multiply it the same way. The reason they separate it is because this dollar amount could be adjusted annually. The base minimum rent is something that stays the same. The additional rent for TICAM, that's the abbreviation for taxes, insurance, and common area maintenance. TICAM can be adjusted annually. So that's why they separate them. All the money goes into the same place, but they separate them so that they can account them differently. Anybody have any questions about that so far? Okay, great. If you do have questions, type them in the chat and I'll get to them as we go. So if you had a question, don't be afraid to type it in there. All right, so remember we talked about the 3 dates. So this is like high up on the level of importance when you're communicating these offers, okay? The first date, and I'm gonna pick on somebody here. Let me open this up so I can see everybody's name. All right. Is that everybody? I don't think it is. I'm gonna pick on Devin. Devin, can you hear us?
Yeah, what's going on, bro?
Hey, man, it's good to see you, bro. I'm glad you're here. Hey, so look, what do you think the lease execution date is? What's that date?
Say one more time.
The lease execution date. What is that date?
That's May 1st, 2020.
Okay. So what are they doing on that day? Why do we want to write that date on the letter of intent?
I'm assuming that's the date that they actually use the property.
Okay. So that's a big misconception. All right.
Okay.
The lease execution date is the date that they want to sign. So between today and May 1st, obviously this is not enough time. This is the amount of time that they're giving the landlord to come up with lease documents and be ready to sign on the dotted line and say that this is going to be a legally binding contract. That's all that day is. That day, the lease execution day, is the day we're signing the paperwork. That's it. Okay. Next is the rent commencement date. Okay. Rent commencement is the day that they do what? Alexis, I want you to answer this one because you're the next person on my screen right here. I see you.
The day they start paying rent.
That's the day that money starts coming out of their pocket. Two gold stars. Okay. So that's the day they start paying. But if you notice something, what do you notice about this? I'm gonna call on Amy because I see her on the screen right now. Amy, what do you notice about these two dates?
They're quite a few months apart.
They're quite a few months apart. So this next section right here is rent abatement, right? So that is the period between the lease execution date and the rent commencement date, and they call that abatement. And during that time, guess what the tenant's not doing?
Paying rent.
They're not paying rent. The tenant's not paying rent during that time. So that's why you need to identify these 3 dates, all consecutive right here. Hey, we're signing the lease on this date, we're commencing the rent on this date, and the rent abatement period is going to be this amount. And I'm going to tell you right now, during this the part of the negotiation, ask for as much as you want. It don't mean you're going to get it all, but ask for as much as you want. All right, so we may have to hurry through the rest of this, but the rest of this is pretty simple.
Hey, Brock, real quick before you move on, Alexis had a question on if they have access to the property in between those 2 dates.
Okay, so that's a perfect question, right? Because that's the next section right here. Landlord's work and delivery, right? And notice that I put a date right here. It's a great question, and it's the next section. But before I do that, okay, these terms right here on this first page, you could do this negotiation with just the first page. All right, this is what's called the general lease terms. These are the most basic and fundamental lease terms. And you could do your negotiation with just this part. Pass this over and say, hey, this is what we're going to pay. This is when we want to move in, or excuse me, this is when we want to start paying rent, all this stuff. This is the most important stuff. This next part, all right, this is a little bit extra. Now, this thing can get way more detailed than this, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail in this section, but after this class, we're going to pass this out to you guys so that you can have it, and this form will be available for you so that you can like read through it and, you know, kind of dissect it a little bit more. So I'm just going to highlight each one of these areas pretty briefly. We've got about 10 or 15 more minutes left of this class, okay? So landlord's work. This is where you negotiate notice I said this right here, ask for everything that you want. This is everything we want the landlord to do before they deliver the premises to us. If you want the carpet replaced, if you want the AC replaced, if you want the walls painted, if you want the pictures taken out, if you want the restaurant booths taken out, or if you need to have it professionally cleaned, or if you need the bathrooms changed to ADA compliant, whatever it is, you want to identify that work here, okay? And you also want to identify the date that you want the space delivered or tendered to your tenant, right? So the time period between the lease execution and the delivery date is going to also determine how much time you ask for rent abatement. So all these things are connected, right? So I can't give you a list, and this is why I didn't include it, all right? I can't give you a list of everything that there is that you could potentially ask for, but I did identify right here, is you want to sit down with this tenant and you want to say, listen, This is our shot. We want to see how motivated the landlord is. We want to get them to do everything that we can before they deliver us the premises. So this is the landlord's work for delivery of the premises. Next section is landlord responsibilities. So this is the section where we're going to tell the landlord the things that we don't want to be responsible for. So when you sit down with the tenant, instead of asking them, what do you want the landlord to be responsible for? You tell them, hey, what are some of the things you don't want to be responsible for? And these are the biggest ticket, high price items. Like, we don't want to be responsible for the roof. We don't want to be responsible for resealing and restriping the parking lot. We don't want to be responsible for the structure of the building, like if a car runs into it or something like that. We don't want to be responsible for the HVAC unit on top of the building. So how much typically does a house's HVAC cost? $10, $15, $20,000? Well, a package unit on top of these buildings, these big mechanical beasts, they run about 25 to 45,000, and you don't want to be responsible for that. So if they say, well, I don't know, what should I ask for? Well, you just go ahead and go through the list of the highest priced stuff and put that on there and do it for them, right? But you want to make sure that you ask them the question, hey, what do you not want to be responsible for? Sometimes it's the water heater. Sometimes it's any kind of other mechanical, like cooktops or coolers or things like that that are in the space before you get there, okay? Remember, it's your opportunity to ask for everything. A lot of this stuff is going to get shot down, so they're not going to tell you, hey, I would have taken care of that for you, but now that you asked, no, they're not going to tell you that. So ask. That's why I say ask for everything. It's very important. We're getting there. Are we losing people? Okay, awesome. All right, so tenant responsibilities. These are the things that you're going to identify that you are okay with being responsible for. Like, you're okay with paying the internet bill. You're okay with paying for interior pest control because you're going to want the bugs not to be in there when you want them done, right? Not when they want them done. Removing your trash, janitorial care, light bulbs, flooring care, taking care of the fire extinguisher, stuff like that. But here's something I want to identify to you guys. Here's a little tactic. All right, this is some extra. Okay, we're going to call expense. Did I misspell that? Sorry. Expense stop. Okay. An expense stop is where you identify something that you can pay annually and where your contribution is going to stop. Like, here's an example. The tenant will contribute no more than $250 annually towards HVAC maintenance. That way, they can keep the contract. They can change the filters and have somebody come in there and clean up the HVAC once every 3 months or once every 6 months. And then if there's a repair that's needed, you give them $250 and that's it for the year. That's called an expense stop. It's the same thing with a water heater. It's the same thing with any kind of like lift station or pump or septic or whatever there is. You just identify, if the landlord's like, well, we want you to take care of it. You say, hey, look, we'll pay this much per year, but we're going to stop at that point. That's called an expense stop. That's a little free bit of extra information today. I'm kidding. Now, next, we talked about landlord's work. What's the tenant's work? So this is the reason that we're asking for time that we're not going to pay rent. And this is all the items included that are not included in the landlord's work. And I just put that in there, but you can list them to show all of the different things that you're willing to do to improve the property. So you want to make sure that you identify all the things that the tenant is doing inside the space, not only to have permission to do it, but to make sure you identify all the things that the tenant is doing on their side and spending money on, okay? The next, I'm going to skip down a couple of spaces. Let's go down here. Everybody see this right here? I'm going to just skip down. So the tenant's work and the landlord's and the furniture, fixtures, and equipment, those are related, okay? I'm going to just type something right here. This is typically called FF and E. Sorry. FF and E. Furniture, fixtures, and equipment. Okay, the little acronym for it is FF&E. So the tenant also has to pay for, let's say it's a restaurant, right? They got to pay for the tables. They got to pay for the cookware. They got to pay for the flatware. They got to pay for the chairs, the little mats that the people stand on, the POS system. And you need to know how they're going to pay for it. And more often than not, if they don't have the money put away and they can't identify to you, it's kind of like, this is kind of like where you want to start asking for the pre-qual letter, but there's not one. So the way you ask the question is you just say, hey, how are we paying for this? Right? Most of the time, landlords will have a lease application for them to fill out where they get to like evaluate their financials and run their credit. They'll run their credit on their social security number or their employer EIN, employer ID number. So you want to make sure that you ask these questions here. There's no lender that's going to jump in and say, oh yeah, they're qualified. It doesn't work that way because people don't lend on rented space most of the time. So this is a big like point of friction to be able to find out if these people are qualified or if you need to go any further. So it's really important that you have this conversation. Signage. This is another thing that they're going to have to pay for. The landlord typically does not, if there's not like a slide that you can pull out and just sticker your name on and slide it back in, if there's like channel letters or a box sign or something like that, this is something where they're going to have to identify that they can spend money on it. Hey, tenants who know this stuff, they know they already got their budget worked out in their business plan. You ain't got to worry about it, right? But you got to make sure that you identify these things and let them know that the tenant at their sole expense has permission to put sign on the building. And a lot of times a landlord will ask you in this situation for like a layout or an overlay of what the sign's going to look like from the sign company. So the sign company is very familiar with doing this. You just call them up and say, here's the logo, show me how this is going to be laid out. And it like gives the measurements, and you typically have to get a permit for that as well. Okay, while we're talking about permits, when you go into this sign part right here, right? And you go into talking about doing any kind of renovations, you always need to make sure that you give them the phone number, email address, point of contact for the permitting and zoning for either the county or the city. And you want to do that in writing, okay? Because they're going to go in there and they're going to start tearing the place up and doing work. And when they come and stop them, when the city comes and stops them because they don't have a permit, guess who they're going to blame? They're going to blame you. And then you're going to say, oh, no, because I sent you an email with the point of contact for the city permitting office and the county permitting office. And I told you that you need to go pull a permit to get all this stuff done. That's going to clean your hands, right? You're not a contractor. You're not a professional estimator on how much this stuff's going to cost or what they're going to need. And I don't recommend that you participate in any of that. All you do is just let them know. Like if they got a food operation, they need to know they got to call the health department. Just give them the phone number. If they've got a place where they're going to be selling alcohol, then they need to have a liquor license. Give them the phone number to ALE. That way, if they open up and they got selling liquor and they say they didn't know, they can't blame it on you. So make sure you know what kind of business they're doing and give them the number and point of contact for who they need to contact to get that stuff permitted, all right? Don't start filling out permits for your clients. It's a terrible idea. Why do you think I know that? Because I've tried to help them to do it for them, and they'll turn on you, okay? They'll turn on you. Anyway, last part of this is the lease form. You want to identify who is responsible for paying for, right? It says the landlord at their sole expense will assemble lease documents. They're going to call their attorney or do whatever they got to do. Go into the North Carolina forms, which I don't recommend doing, but you can. Here's what you need to do on this. You need to identify who's paying for and identify who is drawing up these papers. And I do not recommend that you draw them up yourself. It's a terrible idea. You can fill in the little blanks and the documents that are in the North Carolina forms and they're available to you, but I'm not going to show you that document because that's on you. I haven't done it a whole lot. It's not going to get you in any trouble per se, but if you start drafting language and writing words in and they start getting really technical, I tell you, you got to call an attorney. When in doubt, call an attorney in this section. That's why I added it here. And you need to make sure you identify who's paying for it and who's drafting them up. Okay. And it's a good idea also, if they say they use Heather Green attorney, then you would write it in right here, right? Like by, and then you want to put attorney. Everybody see that? Okay, good. And then finally, here's an exciting part right here. Finally, the broker's commission. Like, how much money are you going to be charging for these services, or typically how do commission fees work for commercial property? Here's how it works. I'm not going to give you a number or percentage. Okay. I'm not going to do it. So we're not going to do any math here, but here's the way that it works. You're going to be charging a commission based off of the initial term of the lease. For commercial property, the way that that gets paid, since you're leasing it for more years, is if it were $1,000 a month and they leased it for 5 years, that would be $60,000. And you're going to charge a percentage. Now, what is that percentage? You guys know I can't tell you that, right? So I'm not gonna. But if it were 1%, then you would just take the 1 and then multiply that times the 60,000, right? And then that's the number that you're going to get, and that's what you're going to ask for. And again, what people ask me all the time, well, what is the typical rate? It's your job to determine what that is based off what's advertised, and if it's off market, it's what you negotiate. Who pays it? Typically, the landlord pays it. But if there's a lot of stuff that you're doing for the tenant, sometimes the tenant will pay it as well. It could be 0 to whatever percent that you negotiate. I just use 1 for instructional purposes. But if some of y'all leave this class and say, well, Brock said you should charge X percent, I'm going to play this recording for you and show you that I didn't say that, all right? Because I know what the law says about how we do that, and it's just really up to the negotiation and the offering that is in the advertisement, and then what is negotiated between you and the landlord. And that's totally private, and that's all I'm going to say about that. But that's how you calculate it, okay? So it's not based off of typically the amount of the first year. It's an amount of the total lease. That's how it's typically done in commercial. Has it been done the other way? Absolutely. And then again, you want to reiterate that there's a timeline for this, and here's where they're going to sign. Now, why are they signing? They're just signing to show that this is what both parties agreed on, and this is what we're going to use to draft up a commercial lease agreement. So back to deal process. How's it work? You show them the property. They say they want it. You write up this form. You submit it to the landlord. Do you think that they're going to come back and say, oh yeah, sure, here, absolutely. 10 times out of 10, you're going to get something different than you gave to them. All right, they're not going to say okay to everything. So this is how you go back and forth. Your job, okay, and I've talked about this before with some other people, and I want to just go over this briefly, but your job at this point is version control, okay? You want to keep a copy, an exact copy of every communication. And every time you go back to them, you want to date the new copy, but keep the old one. So if you make changes or line outs or whatever, you want to keep every copy so that when someone says, hey, Matt, hey, Richard, this is not what I said the first time, you could pull that thing out and say, oh, yes, it is. And this is not something that you do verbally. It's not something that you do over text. All right. This is something that you want to have in a Word document or PDF format that you can show that it was signed or communicated this way every single time. All right. That is, during this process, that's your number one job. And when you get the final copy, you have them sign it, give it to the attorney. And the next part of the process is drafting up a lease. All right. And is there more negotiation in a lease? Absolutely, there is. So this is not the end. All right. So I'm just covering, you found the place, communicating your offer via the letter of intent. So leaving today, the objective of this was to give you the basis knowledge of what form to use, a possible form, it's not the only one, and then how to help your client who you've worked with in the past to be able to rent property and run their business out of it. I think that leaving here today, if you had to sit down with your client and fill this out, I think that you've got enough information to do a good job for them. And that was the goal of this class today. And I hope that all of you got something out of it and that we gave you value today, because that's what the goal was. I see a question here. Let's go over these real quick. Is there a limit to how much the TICAM can be adjusted, Henry? Typically, they cap it at 5%. Okay, is that a number that is universal? No, it's not. But most of the time, the landlord will keep that within 5% of the entire lease amount, right? So if they're charging $1,000, they would cap it at 5% annually. That's a great question, though. Really good question. If they ask you that, say, yeah, we're probably going to get a 5% cap. But as a tenant, that's something you want to ask for. You want to put a cap on how much they can adjust it. Great question. Next is Alexis. She asked, do they have access to the property in between those two dates? I think we answered that, right? If you need access at the same time, typically what they'll do is they'll just stick a lockbox out there if you have an extra one, you know, to where people can go in and check in and out. But you want to keep yourself out of that mix as much as you can, right? But you would want to identify those dates where they wanted it in the section that we talked about, okay? And that was in the landlord's delivery of the premises. We've gone so far over, I'm sorry. Hope everybody's all right with the time here. Next is, do you have an expense stop for each item separately? So the answer to that question is, you can, and I recommend that you do. All right, it can get lengthy when it comes to negotiations, but I will tell you, it's better to err on the side of caution when you're representing the tenant. But I can turn it around real quick and say, if you're representing the landlord, what do you want them to do? You want them to pay for everything, right? So you want to make for sure that you actually give the tenant the opportunity to line out everyone that they want to stop an expense on. Okay. Next, hey, thanks, Corinthia. I appreciate that. Great class. I'm glad you were able to come and make it. And I appreciate them having me. Next is there a special, Henry? Is there special cautions for brokers being the tenant? Help me out with that question, Henry. Give me some more information.
So I was just wondering, like when you're selling a house, you know, you have to have special things if you're the broker selling. But if you're being the one as an agent representing yourself, going into a lease, is there any provisions or is there anything different that goes into it because you're the broker going into a lease with someone else?
Are you talking about like disclosures?
Disclosures, or I don't know. I mean, is there anything that can implicate you legally differently? I don't know. I mean, this is one of those.
I think I know what you're talking about. So what we want to give them to start these communications is you want to fill out, and I think I skipped over this. I'm glad you asked this question. You want to make sure you fill out the working with real estate agents lease transaction form. All right. And after this, maybe we can send it out on an email, Amy, where we can put in there what form number it is, but there's two forms you want to fill out. You want to fill out that one, and you want to fill out a buyer/tenant representation agreement, right? So you want to have an agreement that designates you as the tenant's agent, right? So you got buyer, seller, and dual agent. And this one, you got tenant, landlord, and dual agent. So those will be identified on that form. Really glad you asked that question, because that's something that we needed to hit on. But you want to have them fill out that form. And that's when you also want to make sure that you have another form filled out for your commission split agreement as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then last question here, how do you come up with cost per square foot for the lease amount? Wow. This is man, we could go so far, but I'm going to, okay, there's what's called fair market rent analysis. Okay. And fair market rent analysis is like a, I mean, there's a textbook on it. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just so much information. But basically what you want to do is you're going to have to go on the internet, go in the MLS, go on the internet, and on websites like LoopNet and Crexi. Crexi is CREXI.com, and LoopNet is LOOPNET.com. And you want to see what lease rates are typical for the area. Now, here's the problem. The problem is a lot of those say non-disclosed. This is such a tough question because a lot of times landlords don't want people to know what they're charging. So you're going to have to call those listing agents and ask them to give you a flyer or some kind of information on what they're charging. All right. So if you've got several places and they're going to be all over the map, right? So one down here might charge $12 a square foot, and one over here might charge 30, right? Typically, the best answer I can give you is you're just going to have to tell the tenant that it's most closely related to the area that you're in. So let me ask you a question. Here in Jacksonville, I'm going to pick on Matt again. Matt, where do you think it's more expensive? Is it more expensive on Western Boulevard Extension or on Lejeune Boulevard?
I'd probably say Western.
Yeah, right. So it's really the best answer to your question, Corinthia, is it has a lot to do with location. Is the property on the corner? Does it have high visibility? Is there a traffic signal there? How many vehicles per day are going by the property? All those things directly correlate to what the lease amount per square foot is. And really, it's just something you've got to negotiate, right? I think we've covered all the things. We've got the documents you want to fill out. We've got the lease. So those 3 documents will be the documents that have you being hired as the tenant agent. That's the only scenario that we've painted here today. How you're going to be paid commission, and then working with real estate agents. We've covered how you guys can go through this document with your client and formulate an offer to a landlord. And then the step past this, which will be another class, would be negotiating the lease paperwork and having your client sign a legally binding document, right? So hopefully we've accomplished in this hour, because we're running right up to the hour point. I know there's another class coming. Hopefully we have gone over everything that you need to be able to work with a tenant as a representative and help them procure the space that they need for their business. All right. So, and this gap that we've got here in the market, and that's why I thought this was a great class, is what instrument do we use to make that offer? And this is the most, I guess we would say, the most typical form that's used is a letter of intent lease proposal. Thank you guys for having me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brock. I am getting the, I was trying to get those last things from .loop or from the NCIR forms up here real quick too. So everybody has those just in this. If we can think of anything else, we'll actually have Heather send out a copy of this LOI form that Brock went over today to all the attendees, as well as all the .loop or NCIR forms, sorry, for everybody, just so you can kind of take a look at what Brock recommended to get you started on all of this. And those should be coming out at some time today. If you have any questions at all about anything that Brock talked about today, or suggestions for our next commercial class, we would like to continue doing some of these. Some of you had not jumped on yet at the very beginning when we were asking Brock what else he's going to do. And he is willing to do a lingo class and a fundamentals class. We'll see kind of how all the scheduling goes and how his scheduling looks like. But if we've got people that want this information, we want to get it out to you. So please do let us know what you'd like. specifically on the commercial side, since all of you were obviously interested in getting some of this information. But if there's anything else too, I know Heather had sent out a survey yesterday, if you haven't completed that yet, from the board on education classes that we can get to you during this time. We'd really appreciate that. But again, thank you so much, Brock, for devoting your time to this and to really informing us on how to be better agents, because this does come up, and most of us are residential agents. I'm the first person to say, do not go outside your wheelhouse for a lot of stuff. Refer. That's my big thing on a lot of things. But there are situations where this really can be helpful for us. And just so all of you know, if you don't know Brock personally, he is always available for phone calls on any of this stuff. So if you do have questions, if you're in this situation, please do not be afraid to reach out to him for more information.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Brock.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. See you soon.